think it's joking, but I'm not joking. This is a warning. Seriously, because maybe 90% of you, if not more, somewhere between 90 and 100% of you in this room are programmed. And we're going to talk about that between now and Sunday in various formats. That's why you're attracted to this class. Maybe that's why you were attracted to me in the first place. But almost all of you in this room have some form of programming, whether it was specific or general. And we'll talk about that during the evening and day tomorrow as well. The reason I have a warning up there is because I have to warn you that somewhere between Friday and Saturday, it's a possibility, maybe a likelihood, that I might say a word or a phrase or put something on the blackboard or show something to you, or someone else in the room might discuss something that could trigger you or that could set off an activation of a program within you. And I need you to be aware of that. Now, during the course of the weekend, you will learn certain techniques on self-deprogramming. And there's a difference between programming and deprogramming. Tonight we're just going to learn the history and get into that, because you need to know the background. If at any time any of you feel like you're being activated, remember to balance yourself, to ground yourself. Most of you have studied some of the work and have been with me before. In fact, I think just about all of you know how to use these techniques, the color brown, grounding, etc. If you feel that you cannot control an activation or that you feel you're getting set off in any way, please speak to me privately, or you can see Edith, and she will help you as best she can with what she can do for you. I would advise you to take very good notes. You're allowed to tape record if you wish. But I really am serious about the warning. I don't know what's in your programming. It could be one of a billion trillion things. You should also be aware that you're being triggered just about every day and every moment of every day. Every time you listen to the news or watch television or simply walking in the street or driving in your car, you're being bombarded now daily with ELF pulses, which we'll discuss, and microwave and subliminals, all of which we're going to discuss. I have a lot of material to get through, and I have to admit to you that preparing for this weekend was very difficult for me. As far as I know, there isn't any programming, mind control, deprogramming classes being given out there, at least not in the format that I'm going to be giving it to you. The gods are angry. And so, please bear with me, because I spent a lot of time going through all of my notes and all of my experiences and my research and the things that I know, and writing them down as best that I can in detail. And so the writing on my pages are very small and compact. And since I've never done this before publicly, I may very frequently have to look at something, and I might even lose my place for a moment. So please just bear with me on that. I will get through as much as I possibly can. Okay. Now, we need to keep today's time within the boundaries and constraints of the time. And after my time of giving today's lecture is over, I will open up to question and answer period. So your questions will be answered. Also limited time after that as best as possible. I know there's a lot of current event situations that many of you want to know about. Much of that may be covered in understanding when I go through the mind control and programming information. So please be patient, and certainly if you have a question pertinent to the specific information I'm speaking about at the moment, then ask. But if it's not exactly pertinent, please wait till after today's session and I'll answer it afterwards, okay? Thank you. And so I took this very seriously when I put it up here. And you know what? That in itself might have triggered somebody. Even that word in the color that I used. So, what is mind control? Let's work with that first. What is mind control? And what is the difference between mind control and programming? Are they the same thing or are they two different things? Who knows? What ideas do you have? Anybody?
No, I think they're very similar. Programming, I could see on one level can be just a cultural programming. Growing up in a culture, growing up in family, religion, that's all forms of programming. Everything just needs your day. To me, mind control would then be a deliberate programming done by someone for the purposes of altering their consciousness to their purposes.
All right. What I wrote down here was that mind control is the ability of a person or thing to have manipulative ability over another. And that doesn't mean it's artificial or natural. It could be either way. So it's the ability of a person or thing to have manipulative power over another. That's mind control. Anyone need me to repeat that again? Okay. Now what is programming? Programming is the imprinting and compartmentalization of a person's thought process or mind pattern for specific purposes. I'll repeat that. Programming is the imprinting and compartmentalization of a person's thought process or mind pattern for specific purposes. Both mind control and programming are lifelong processes. In other words, it's not that you have a session or two and you're done. It's over the course of a lifetime, and the details of that we'll get into tomorrow. You should also be aware that in both programming and in mind pattern, or mind control, it is the number 3 is very important. And if you remember, now I have to tell you something. How appropriate the storm is.
Yes.
Because do you remember this archetype from Language of Hyperspace? The lightning bolt, it's activation. So I really couldn't have arranged it better myself. Maybe I did arrange it myself, I don't know. But that is the mind pattern or archetype of activation. The use of the number 3. When somebody tells you something 3 times in a row, it sinks in. That's why if you watch television, you'll see that same commercial 3 times in about a 4-minute period before the show comes back on. And you'll say, why are they showing this again? It was just on. It's 3 times imprints on you. That's mind control. And that leads me into the history of mind control and programming. How long do you think mind control and programming have been occurring on this planet? Since day 0. And it existed before any civilization on this planet existed. We're going to get to that. The question, what was the purpose? The purpose of mind control and programming, why do you think? Now, those of you who studied with me before, and most of you have, and know about galactic history and DNA, what type of beings were most involved in controlling and manipulation? Sirius, and who else? Who gave them the? Well, who did they give the technology to? The reptilians and Lyrians. Yes, absolutely, both. And why would a civilization want to program their own people? To, number one, perpetuation of the civilization. No deviation from what they want the population to do. That's the overall concept of the reasoning behind it. The continuation of the population, of the civilization, without deteriorating it.
You mean if they didn't do that, they
Free will would encourage deviation from the original. It's kind of like evolution of civilization. New ideas pop in, new directions, and it kind of go off the track of where it was originally. But if everybody is controlled, they keep it on the same road, same focus. No deviation. No deviation.
positive or I'm not getting
Now, judging it is another story.
right.
Is it positive? Is it negative? What do you think? That's up to the person, isn't it? Overall, we are conditioned to believe it is not a good thing. Yet, we accept it all the time. Edith.
You're saying that most programming started from the series?
They had technology, but I don't want to get dwelling on that kind of stuff. Just suffice to know that it existed way before any life on Earth existed, and its purpose was to maintain a civilization in a certain way. All religions, what are they? Mind control or programming? What would you say? They're both. Mostly mind control and some programming. And how does religion, if you had to pick one word that would describe how religion uses mind control and programming, what word would you use as an overall word? Fear. Who said fear? Very good.
Fear of God.
For example, if you don't do A, B, and C, you'll be excommunicated and burn in hell forever. Okay? Something like that. That's fear. And most people, especially in ancient times, had no concept of God mind or what life was really about. They had to be directed by those who were their religious leaders and government officials. And so religion was designed to control masses of people without the use of technology. Why? Because if you have several 100,000 people in your civilization, and you can't watch all of them, but you want them all to be loyal to you, you devise a religious system that tells them on this day, at this time, you do this, and you worship in this way, and God tells you to do this, and if you don't, you'll die, or you'll burn in hell, or some horrible thing will happen to you. And so that's how religion really had its foundation. Oh yeah, we were just waiting for you. Have a seat. One of the earliest known organizations that used mind control and programming was actually discovered or found out about in 1298 by Marco Polo in his travels through Asia. And he reached a valley in what was then a town called Alamut, Persia. And he heard of an organization and a group there called the Ashishin. Ashishin in English. That was in Persia. And you've heard the story of the old man in the mountain Have you ever heard that story before? The old man on the mountain? His name was Alahuddin. And in Persian and in Arabic, it means God is the judge. Alahuddin. God, He is the judge. That's how it translates. And it was quite an amazing group which only used very young boys between the ages of 11 up to perhaps 17 or 18. And what this Alahuddin would do was he would drug certain children, these young boys, while they slept, and they would fall into a kind of stupor, almost a coma, and then he would have his men take them from their beds and bring them to his mountain hideout. And when they woke up, they would be surrounded by beautiful dancing girls and wonderful food and everything they could possibly want in life. And they were told that they had died and gone to heaven, and that this was their paradise. But, Alahuddin told them, it was determined that they needed to return to the earth because they were not ready to be in paradise. So of course, these young boys were very upset that they were here in paradise with all this wonderful thing, and now they were going to be sent back to earth. And he said, the only way you can come back to this paradise is if you do what I tell you to do. And you will receive messages on the earth. And then when you finally die, you will come back here forever. And so he would give them a potion to drink again that would knock them out. They would be brought back to their beds, and they would wake up in the morning thinking that they had died and gone to heaven and sent back. Then whenever they were needed, Alahuddin would send a messenger to their home and say, the gods have told us you need to kill so-and-so, whatever person that they needed to assassinate or get rid of. And the boys would do it. Not fearing for their own lives, because they knew they'd been to paradise and they were going to go back there. And so he had created, Alahuddin, the first known organization, mind-controlled young men who were assassins. And that's where the word assassin comes from this word ashishin. That's where the word assassin comes from. And that also became an Arabic word. But it was part of this group. If we go back in time even further, may I erase this? If we go back in time even further, we have the ancient Egyptian temples. That were run by the priests of Egypt under the direction of the Pharaoh. And it was in ancient Egypt that secret ceremonies would occur in the temples that were not allowed for public view. These were left over from ancient Sumerian and Atlantean and Lemurian rites. And it was in ancient Egypt that the rite of the Mesa was performed. And you may have heard of me talk about this once before in galactic history. And Mesa was the name for crocodile fat from the Nile River, the crocodiles in the Nile River at the time. And they would take the fat of the crocodile and smear it over their bodies. And that's where in the ancient Bible it comes to the term, anoint my head with oil. It comes from the oil and the fat from the crocodile. And that would lead them, those who were anointed with this oil of crocodile fat, would become holy people or spiritual people that will do the bidding of the priests. This word, over the years, in the ancient Hebrew language, became Moshe, or Moses, which is what the Bible is really talking about there, as far as the story is concerned. And that actually morphed into the word Messiah, or someone who will save you from your life. These were all forms of mind control to get somebody and large groups of people to do what the religious leaders and government officials wanted them to do. So a lot of the stories that you read about in the Bible are actually allegorical stories, or even stories about sacrifice and ritual and programming, the details of which we will discuss tomorrow. But just to give you a background on the history of these things that you thought were ordinary or mundane really are not. So if you take the combination of Atlantean, Celtic, Egyptian and Sumerian religious rites and beliefs, were all morphed over the centuries and millennium into ritual and ceremony under umbrella organizations, many of which still survive today under different formats. And all of it was based initially on the Lemurian/reptilian lifestyle, which involves complete mind control and programming in order to ensure the continuation of the Draco or Draconian civilization. Now, over the years, different civilizations use different methods. For example, the Roman Empire, and even into the early 20th century, programming was done via potions, torture, blood ritual, and imprisonment, which were performed by secret societies and cults. Yes. The Roman Empire, and leading up into the 20th century, programming was done via potions, torture, blood ritual, and imprisonment, which were performed by secret societies and cults within the civilization. The governments used constant propaganda. Now, propaganda, would you consider to be mind control or programming? It'd be mind control, because it's really more the manipulation of another rather than a forced programming. In other parts of the world, for example, China, Japan, Mongolia, they used pure Lemurian techniques of torture, herbs, and mutilations, which, by the way, still exist and continue to this day. China, Japan, and Mongolia use pure Lemurian techniques of torture, herbs, and mutilations. The Inca and Maya and Aztec use potions, herbs, sacrifice, tattoos, and skin carvings for their programming purposes. American Indians used body paint, ritual, piercings, drumming, smoke, and tobacco. And some of the American Indian programming techniques were quite brutal. Some of you have seen the films or movies where they would have a central pole in the ground, and then they would have these strings or ropes hanging from it with hooks, and people would actually be pierced with the hooks through ribs, through other parts of their body, and then spun around on the pole.
Maybe like the Sunday.
Sundance.
Yes.
Could you go over the American Indians?
American Indian used body paint, ritual, piercings, drumming. By the way, drumming is part of the sound frequency which opens up certain parts of the brain for programming. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Smoke and tobacco. Now, smoke and tobacco are two different things. Smoke is from the fire that they would create, and tobacco, of course, is what they would smoke separately. In India, they used tantric practices, which actually involve the chakra system, ceremony, incense, oils, and animal parts. And by the way, oils are becoming much more popular now for a reason. Yes, they do have purposes like the essential oils for healing techniques, etc., but they can also be used for programming. So you should be aware of that. Certain smells, certain combinations open up certain frequencies in the brain and enable you to be controlled and manipulated in a certain way. African tribes,
Are there specific oils that you will tell us about?
I will. In fact, tomorrow, you're going to get a very long list that I will hand out of the drugs and oils, etc., that they use. Some of which may be surprising to you. African tribes used powders, roots, piercings and mutilations, rituals, and animal skins. The purpose of the animal skins was so that you would pick up the vibration or energy of a particular species and incorporate that within your own persona. And that is also a form of programming. And in Tibet,
Sorry, repeat that list again.
yes, in Africa, they use powders, roots, piercings and mutilations, rituals, and animal skins. And in Tibet, it was the use of isolation, mental abuse, cold, altitude, inculcations, which is the mantras and the chanting. And despite what you've been told about Tibet, they actually were quite brutal. One of the things they did as far as mind control and programming was concerned was to actually take an initiate and drill a hole into their forehead until it reached the pineal gland, straight down. And then they would use drugs and other herbs and incense to activate the pineal gland. It was quite a painful. They actually went right through the bone.
Ram did a whole series of books about his initiations on
Very, very painful process. All of this as a background leads up into the 1930s and 1940s, when this was all brought together with the use of technology. Why was it necessary in the 20th century to use technology for mass mind control and programming? If you remember, I believe I discussed this with you a while back, in the 1860s, there was an Illuminati meeting in Europe for what they called Agenda 2000. That meant they gave themselves approximately 130 some odd years to achieve complete global domination. But remember, when you are a worldwide group of maybe a couple of 100,000 people, and you're up against billions, there are not enough weapons or soldiers to beat those odds. So logically and brilliantly, the most perfect way to achieve your goal is through mind control and programming of the entire global population in one form or another. And so they spent millennia and centuries developing the techniques that would achieve this goal. And what we're witnessing today is the culmination of that. And it has been quite successful. Now, I had mentioned to you many times that between 2001 to 2003 is when most, if not all, of the programmed people will be activated or turned on in their programming. Why 2003 when it was called Agenda 2000? Those of you who've been with me for a while remember that in 1363, a British king was coronated and decided in honor of his coronation that the following day would start the year 1366, eliminating 3 years from the calendar. So in effect, the year 2003, had things not been changed, would have been the year 2000. This is what they call a global deception, part of a global ceremony and ritual, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So really, we could take 3 years away. We're actually in the year 1999, had things not been changed. 2003, between June and August of 2003, which gives us maybe a year, if not less, is when the culmination of Agenda is to be completed. And between now and then, all people will be activated in whatever programming that they have. I should have done this class a long time ago, but it wasn't possible.
That wasn't a time manipulation.
Not a time yet, it was actual change in calendar.
Okay.
And now let me explain to you, who is mind control?
Excuse me, sir, what was the name of that king?
You know I have to look that up, I don't have it. The Earth, right now, has 6.3 billion people. The United States has an approximate population of 280 million. One to 2% of the entire global population is mind control programmed specifically, which means 63 to 126 million people on the earth are specifically programmed. And in the US, it's 4 to 5%, which is 12 to 14 million people in just the US. These are specifically programmed people. Now, when I say specifically programmed, all of the Earth, all 6.3 billion people, are programmed via subliminal messages from satellites, TV and radio, overhead wires, electrical systems, music, video games, computer games, etc. All of these things have subliminal messages in them that you cannot physically hear, but your brain hears, because it picks up the frequency that's embedded in the carrier waves. There are certain individuals who are specifically targeted for individual programming. And what that means is, because of certain conditions or background information about them, they are to be used for specific functions. And so they are specifically taken from their environment and programmed. This is a process that usually starts even before birth, in utero, and extends into their lifetime, especially for the first 30 or 40 years. And they are in all walks of life. You don't have to be at a certain echelon or a certain level in society to be targeted for programming. They need control in all areas. Whether you're a teacher or a politician or a street sweeper or an unemployed person, it does not matter. They need people in every walk of life to facilitate their agenda. It can be a specific purpose, or it could be a multiple task. Usually, it's time-based, meaning it's not supposed to activate until a specific event occurs, or a specific date. All of these details we will learn more about tomorrow. And so then the next logical question is, who is chosen for programming? What are the basic requirements? Well, first of all, it's based on the needs of those who program people, the Illuminati, for example. What do they need people to do? Who would best fulfill that function? It is also based on genetics. Now, all people of all races have been programmed. Some specifically, some not. But the most or widest range or highest percentage of programmed people would be those with genetics of blonde hair, blue eyes, red hair, green eyes, or any variation thereof. That doesn't mean if you have black hair and brown eyes you're not programmed. It means the likelihood is greater if you are blonde hair, blue-eyed, etc. Why? Because those genetics are more easily programmable. But here's the thing. Let's say you have brown hair, brown eyes. Does that mean that it's not as likely? Look at your genetics. Do you come from a lineage of people with those genetics anyway? If you do, then you have the recessive genes within you that are programmable. So you have to look at that aspect as well. There are many brown-haired, brown-eyed people walking around who are heavily programmed because of their family histories and genetics. It's not only the physical characteristics, but the history and background as well. It requires a high IQ. They look for intelligent people, and especially people that have certain talents and abilities. Now remember, I warned you many, many times about identifying children who are considered high intelligence, psychic, etc. What the New Age is promoting as indigo children. Very, very dangerous. Remember I said to you the word indigo is a code word for indicate or label. And when next year comes, if not before, and there is a rule and a regulation about the use of these abilities, they're going to confiscate children that have been identified with these capabilities. They'll be taken away. So be careful what you do with that.
So you said that before now you weren't able to teach this because it wasn't possible. What are your thoughts on that? Is it because you weren't ready personally, or there was something else going on?
Well, I wasn't ready personally to do it because I had my own programming issues, which I still do. And there wasn't an audience ready to hear it. It really was the events of 9/11 that woke some people up. Because for years I've been saying such things would happen. And no one believed it until it happened. Then they woke up. And then, quite honestly, I found my work shifting, especially in the last 3 months, from working with people who had mind pattern issues, healing issues, all of a sudden started switching slowly then rapidly to people who were totally mind control and programmed. So I'm doing it almost 90% or more of my time. And so it felt a need to teach this to the people who need to have it understood. Because it's happening whether you realize it or not. Just listening to the radio, watching TV, walking in the street, you're getting programmed.
Stewart, I just wanted to make a comment about the indigo concept in public schools. What they call it is gifted and talented. And so, of course, every parent is like, of course I want my kid to be gifted and talented.
Right.
So, and my child has been involved with that, and I can't find anything about it that is wonderful. There's nothing wonderful about it at all. It's boring, it's mundane, it doesn't teach them anything. It's pure linear. And there's nothing wonderful about it.
And that's a good point. She said that in the schools, instead of course, using a new age word like indigo, they're calling them special or gifted children.
And talented.
Or talented children. And so, of course, every parent wants their child to be in that program. And what they're really doing is testing to see which children have a capability. And it's all being documented. And even those tests that are given for employment, those personality tests that are all computerized, and you fill out, it's hundreds of questions about your personality, your likes, your dislikes, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes through a computer, and this printout comes out that just point blank tells you what type of personality you have. And they're very accurate. That was created by a man who was involved heavily in mind control and programming and worked for the government. And just about all employment agencies and large corporations are using them. And so I would advise against taking such things because it will label you and it will categorize you. Unfortunately, if you have children in school, at some point they will all be forced to take it. And it will be given in such a way to show the school how to direct them into their classes that they need to take, or what kind of a career they need to have, etc., etc. And that's exactly what will happen. If it comes out that your child has a certain personality, they will say, that child must study these topics only, and must go into that profession. There will be no deviation. Total control. Kind of like how it was in the Middle Ages with the guilds. There was a gold workers and a horseshoe maker and all these. They had apprentices and guilds, and when you went in that was your life forever. You could never go out into anything else. That's what it's going back into.
Stewart, one more thing I was going to...
Yes.
At 7th grade, they require the kids to, prestigious colleges contact the school, and they want the kids to take these standardized tests. And under the guise of being a really highly thought of college, all the parents flock to do this. This particular year, my child was in 7th grade, and I refused to have him take the test. I was the only one that didn't have their child take that test. And then they send you these letters, and they want you to participate in this and this and this and this. But you're right, they have you categorized as what you're best at. It's really amazing. And everybody, who wouldn't want their child to go to Johns Hopkins University? I mean, it's stuff like that. Amazing.
Absolutely. That's exactly correct. And what's going to happen in the future is there will no longer be universities and colleges or even high schools as there are now, but there will be specific schools for specific professions that your child will be directed into at an early age, and they will graduate from that school and be in that profession. No deviation from that. They will be determined from these tests and profiles what you're capable of doing, and that's what you will be given to do. Where is that happening now? What?
In Germany, when I grew up, you already pointed to this.
Yes.
What they go on.
And where is it happening on a much larger scale, almost forced? China. China. You know, for example, if a little 3 or 4 year old child shows a capacity for being a gymnast, that child is taken from its parent. And in China, you're only allowed to have one child. So what do? They say, as a compensation, the parent will go from this hovel into a very nice apartment in the city and be given food coupons, etc., every month as a compensation for taking their child. So some parents look forward to that. And under certain circumstances, especially if the child was a girl, they will let you have another child. Maybe you'll get a boy this time. As you know, in China, girls are not valued at all. And that's why most are given up for adoption or killed, because they're not allowed to have more than one. And if you have a girl first, not acceptable. Now, all Illuminati families, and if you remember that little pyramid I had drawn for you a while back, and here at the top, that eye of the pyramid, was those 13 families who are the Illuminati. And right underneath that was the committee of 300, the 300 families that support the 13 families. All of them, without exception, are 100% programmed. That's just part of what they do. That's their religion. And it is a religion to them. Program the child so there's no deviation from what they must do for the civilization. And all of the rest of here, the masses and all the other layers, and there are 13 layers, by the way, all the other people in the other layers are controlled to some degree or another, whether specifically or subliminally. But these two groups, these two levels, are 100% individually programmed. Not a question. Not a deviation. What happens to people when they are not programmable? What happens to people when they are of a genetic background that is considered not programmable or not easily programmable, and too much dissidence within that group or species or race? What is the result? Out? Yeah, where is this happening? Africa. Most of Africa is being destroyed. Where else?
Prisons?
Well, yes, but prisons are used mostly for experimentation purposes. Latin America, the Aborigine people, a lot of Asian people, all being eliminated to one degree or another because they're not considered programmable. There is a small percentage that is kept for what? Service people, slaves, etc. Absolutely. If you go to a hotel in Australia, who are the housekeepers? Not that many of them. Who is now the housekeepers in Australia?
Vietnamese.
Hispanic people and Vietnamese, etc. Hispanic people in Australia.
What makes those groups of people not programmed?
Their genetics. The way their genetics are constructed does not allow for mind control programming ways to easily access the mind pattern.
But isn't it like, don't they have their own kind of programming?
Yes, many of them have their own religious programming and mind control, absolutely, within the context of their own culture. But on a global basis, for what is necessary to get to that agenda, no, they're not capable of being programmed in that depth. Which is also why the Illuminati are seeking to eliminate native peoples wherever they find them, like the American Indian, or like the Aborigines, or etc. Why? Because those people have a greater use of the brain capacity. Remember, humans use 10% or less of their brain. But if you don't know that that's what you're supposed to use, you use more of it. If you're not conditioned to using less, you use what you have. If your whole life you're taught to use only up to your elbow and not the rest of your arm, you don't know how to use the rest of your arm. But if nobody told you that, you can use the whole thing. So those people are dangerous, because studying those cultures could make you realize what I'm not doing. So they're being eliminated. In the United States, it started by plying them with alcohol and drugs. American Indians have the highest alcoholism rate in the world. And they're shoved on reservations. They're given some government money to raise some crop on untillable land. And that's the end of that. And all you have to do is drive out west and look at the reservations, and there's not a thing you can do with that land. Nothing. And so they drink. No problem anymore. Yes?
And you say that the Illuminati are all 100% programmed.
Yes.
Now, I need to be clear, is it the reptilians that are programming them 100%? Well, I thought that the Illuminati were programming the others.
You're confusing two separate issues now. Okay? The Illuminati have their own programming for their own people, for their own way of life.
Oh, so if they're 100% programmed, they have that self.
Yes, and that's really what we're talking about, is the Illuminati programming that's been developed over the centuries and millennia.
That's what I thought. I wondered about who was programming them.
Well, that information or that programming initiated eons ago when this planet was colonized, and it morphed into what we have now over the millennia. It's really the same thing, new version. Okay? Now, what else do they do to people who maybe are necessary but not programmable? You see it happen right today, is on the news weeks ago. What are they doing to those other people? Chips. Putting chips in them. The chips can override mind pattern and tap directly into the nervous system and manipulate brain waves. We're going to learn how that works tomorrow when we look at frequencies and hertz levels, and when we do the parts on technology. They also have created viruses and bacteria over the last 50 years through experimentation that they've injected into people to see what results it would have on the genetics, on the mind, and on the body. That finally led into what we now have as the flesh-eating virus. That was the culmination or result of all these testings of viruses and bacteria on people. It's a perfect weapon to eliminate people. Originally, the test subjects that they used to use were derelicts, prisoners, orphans, homeless people, drug addicts, or generally anyone who would be considered expendable or who would not be missed. That was the original test subjects within the last 100 years. Illuminati, Committee of 300, and those who have the proper genetics, as we just mentioned, their programming has been generational. Meaning, if you're programmed and you have blonde hair and blue eyes, it is more than likely that your ancestors have been programmed in the last few hundred years in your genetic family history. And it's passed on. Because as we're going to learn, that programming actually becomes part of your genetics and can be passed on to your descendants. Makes programming a lot easier that way.
Regarding viruses and bacteria, would you say most of the viruses and bacteria that are pathogenic are just part of our mind pattern being manifested, or how much of it was developed, like
Okay.
smallpox, like polio, bubonic plague, all those. How many of that was really genetically created?
Most of it was genetically created. Remember that human life on this planet is not natural. And therefore, this is actually a hostile environment to your body. This planet is dangerous to your health, literally. You did not originally come from here, so it's alien to you. So the viruses and bacteria that exist here, and microplasms that exist here, can cause great damage to your body. And so that can be used as a weapon. If you take that and you enhance it, change the genetics, as in the AIDS virus, for example, then you have a tremendous weapon that can be used against large groups of people. So here's a clue about programming and diseases, etc., that are artificially created. So they take what's naturally there and they enhance it. They take your own mind pattern and use it against you. So in effect, you are a weapon against your own self. And there's some terminology that we need to learn before we go on. And here's a word that is not in the dictionary. Cryptocracy. Now, who speaks Greek?
Secret society.
Very good. The Illuminati like to call themselves the cryptocracy, the secret society. This can also be not only society, but government or governing body. Now here's something that you don't know. Maybe you do know, but I'll tell you anyway. It's part of history, and you can actually find it out on your own, but it's not taught in school, and it will not be in a textbook. Now, state of emergency meant what? It meant, number one, they could levy federal taxes on the population to raise money for the war effort. It also meant that certain acts were initiated by the government for national security purposes against the enemy. Basically what that means is they can do anything they want to the population under the guise of national security. They can come into your home, they can spy on you, they can kill you if they suspect you of something. It's exactly what the Homeland Security Office can do now. Yes. And then what they did, in 1947, the only problem was in 1945, when the war supposedly ended, they just forgot to rescind this. Just slipped their mind. And it still exists, which is why federal income tax is allowable. Federal income tax is a special law. It is not a federal law. It's a special law. And in 1947, they created the National Security Act, which in effect overthrew the democracy of the United States. It basically invalidated the Constitution. It meant that for the purposes of national security, they can do anything they want. Take your home, take your children, whatever. Part of mind control and programming. Keep the population insecure and fearful, and when that happens, you will know that you're controllable. If you're insecure and in fear, you will do anything that is told to you to save you. What else happened in 1947 that kind of gave a little push of fear into the public? Say it loud, please. Roswell. 1947, the Roswell incident in New Mexico, which basically gave the population the idea that there was an alien presence on the earth that we could not defend against. And they said right in the newspaper, front page, Air Force captures flying disc. And it's from outer space. Next day, it became a weather balloon. That's how they play with the mind games. Put something in your head and say, oh no, it's something else. What does that do to your mind pattern? It fractures your mind pattern. Well, is it this? Is it that? They said this, but it was that. Confusion, doubt, split, control. Roswell incident was staged. That was not a natural event. It was a staged event.
It also does something else. If they shift into it's a weather balloon, you still have that fear there somewhere. It doesn't go away. It's just
Right, it's always there under the
until
surface.
another
Exactly.
incident.
And then from that point on, there was a UFO craze till this day. What else happened in 1947 that is not ever publicized, but you can look it up in military records? Anybody know? Helga, you might know.
Sure.
I'm serious.
I'm not going to tell you I was still committed to you.
Probably. People who make jokes like that are actually telling the truth. Project Paperclip. Yeah. Paperclip to bring in the Nazi scientists who were involved in the mind control in the concentration camps. But something else happened also involving military and Germans. In 1947, 2 years after the war supposedly ended, there was a massive, yes?
You went to Antarctica?
Yes. There was a massive joint American and British military convoy that went to Antarctica. Why? What do we know about Antarctica? The Schwabenland, where the Germans actually went after World War II in 1945 with their technology and their equipment by submarine to Antarctica. And if you remember the last time I was here, I told you about Lake Vostok in Antarctica, which has now been abandoned because of some strange electromagnetic anomaly which is coming up from underneath that underground lake, which is frozen. All has to do with mind control and those involved with it. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. How many of you heard the story of a woman, and I'll have to put it in quotations, whose name was Candy Jones? How many of you know that story? Some of you do. Okay. Her real name was Jessica Wilcox. And this is a story that happened in the late 1940s and 1950s, and even into the 1960s. And she was the first programmed sex slaves by the government. And she was used in New York and California and Asia and even Europe. Candy Jones was the name of her alter, her other personality. Her real name was, as I'll put it here, Jessica Wilcox.
She's a model.
Yes, she was a model, and she eventually owned her own agency in Manhattan. And very often she would get a manila envelope in the mail, and she'd open the envelope and she'd go into Candy Jones. And she actually was a pinup girl in the 1940s during the war. A lot of military people had her up in their walls. And she was the first known woman in the United States to be used in this manner, which eventually became known as the monarch programming, which we're going to get into. She tried to kill herself many times unsuccessfully. Went through a lot of therapy. Knew a lot of well-known, high-level people who basically used and abused her. She became the prototype of the monarch sex slave. Which, by the way, even though there's mostly women in this program, there are also men. Although it's not as common. Her programming in those days used a lot of hypnosis. So that, and there were shots taken of such people where they would actually have the person go into the altar and then take a cigarette and burn their skin while they're talking to them. They felt nothing. Or they would take a pin or a clip and or a needle and jag right through the skin in their arm or their face. No reaction. Take it out, no wound. Go to the altar, to the original personality. The original personality had no memory of the event. Therefore, the body responds to what the mind remembers and does. No wound. This is also how you can be taken and programmed brutally and have no mark on your back. Because if you return to a different alter personality, which does not remember or have the experience, the body will not show that experience. Remember what we learned in language of hyperspace and in healing techniques. The body does what the mind tells it. The body does not lie. The body has no memory of an event. There is no evidence of an event.
Cellular memory.
Cellular memory of who is in control. Who is operating the genetics at the moment. That's what will be shown. There have been personality compartments or alters within the same person who have been in surgery or who have an allergy or who are mentally ill. And then when they're in an alter, those manifestations do not show because it's another personality.
That's actually multiple personality.
We're going to talk about that. There's many forms of MPD or multiple personality disorder. Some is programming, some is natural, some is something else.
How about when people get like skin grafts and eye transplants from pigs, and then they start taking on, well, from other
The
people,
characteristics.
similar characteristics?
Yes.
Don't
Mm-hmm. There you're talking about
they?
energetics.
Cellular memory, isn't it?
Yes, but it's foreign cellular. It's not from that person's body. There's the difference. We're talking about an alter within the same body, same cells. When you put new cells from a different body into that, that's a different story. Okay, that's a matter of energetics.
Jack Schwartz, German Jewish man who's in concentration camps, he did a lot of New Age stuff. Because I saw him do all of that, with a needle in the arm,
Yeah.
no breathing arm.
Yeah.
And the Germans let him go because they were terrified. Of course, that's all stories.
I'm going to get into some of the histories right now. First of all, what is brainwashing? Is it a form of programming? It is a form of programming. It involves hunger or food deprivation, fatigue or sleep deprivation, tenseness or stress, threats, violence, drugs, and hypnotism. All of these are components of brainwashing, which is a form of programming. It is mostly done by military of an enemy nation who was trying to get information from a captive person. But it can be done in other circumstances. Most of this work involving mind control and programming in its modern form was developed by the Nazis, particularly Joseph Mengele, who was known as the Angel of Death. And despite what you may have learned, Mengele was brought to this country under Project Paperclip to continue his work. Only Mengele here was known as Dr. Green. Sometimes he was also called Dr. Greenberg. He went to or worked for the OSS, which was the Office of Strategic Services back in the late 40s. The OSS became the CIA. And he continued his projects both here and in Canada and also in South America, particularly in Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. They became a gigantic laboratory for him where he practiced mind control and genetic manipulation. What he was trying to do in South America was to see if they could take a race of people and convert them into programmable genetics. So he was very interested in turning brown eyes into blue eyes and brown or black hair into red or blonde hair. And he worked a lot on the Indians in the Amazon and then the indigenous population in Paraguay and Argentina. In fact, a movie was made about it, I believe, in the late 70s or 80s called The Boys from Brazil. It was a book and then it was a movie, and that was based on Dr. Mengele's work. Yes. And in fact, he created a program that he started in Germany where he would have genetically altered babies that were artificially inseminated or induced, and then he would give them to other people to raise. We did this specifically in the United States and in Scandinavia, where he would look for donors, a man and a woman, who could then create a child. The child would be taken at birth and placed with a family that was part of the program. It was a Lebensborn program. It's called Lebensborn. Started in Germany and continued in the United States. Many of those children were placed in Pennsylvania, New York, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and California, in families who were of German, Austrian, or even Eastern European descent.
I can be the word, is it Laban what?
Born.
Born?
Lebensborn.
Or born?
Mm-hmm. And many of the children in Europe, specifically many of those who were born in Britain and other parts of Southern Europe or Eastern Europe, were placed in Scandinavia, particularly in Norway and Sweden. There was a crop that they developed, which is now matured, and which is in control of certain things. Yes?
What year is this from?
This was done 1945 to approximately 1970. That was the main part of it. They used a lot of orphanages and adoption agencies, particularly in the southern United States, where they would actually steal babies or buy babies and transfer them. Particularly agencies in Texas and Tennessee. This doesn't happen so much anymore. That project is over. May I erase this? Now they just clone whatever they want. Technology has improved greatly for them since the 1970s or late 60s, actually. You should know that cloning did not develop recently. The first cloned person occurred in Germany in 1927. That was the first cloned person in Germany in 1927. And it occurred in the United States, in Massachusetts, at MIT in 1967. And that was a continuation of the German experimentation of the earlier part of the century. Now, there was also a doctor, George Estabrook, who, in the early 1940s in Colgate University, used hypnosis as a form of mind control to control the population via the medical profession. In other words, he was teaching medical professionals to put suggestions into their clients and patients during hypnosis to see what the results would be. He felt that this was a good way to control the population because if people were to go to their doctors or to their psychiatrists and get hypnotized, you could easily induce suggestions in the population that way. Of course, that idea developed before television and radio were really that popular, and so it was not very useful for the general population for a very long period of time. That was early 1940s. That led to Dr. Watkins in 1947 again. And what he did was to induce criminal behavior in his patients through hypnotic suggestions. So that any one of you, whom you might consider to be a kind and patient and calm person, would go to a person like Dr. Watkins, and you would come out to be a criminal or violent person. Why? Why? How could that possibly happen? Because you are all capable of anything. Within you is a wide range of possibilities. Not all of them are developed. But a trained hypnosis or hypnotist can get into your mind and bring out everything that's been buried or suppressed that you consider negative within you. And make you that the operative personality.
It's said that they could go in and do something that they wouldn't consciously agree to.
Correct. That's correct. You can't. No, they can't make you do something that's not within your pattern. Whether it's conscious or subconscious doesn't matter. But they can make you do anything with the right controls, with the right patterning. And this is a detailed and intricate science. This has developed over thousands and thousands of years.
But isn't there some things that won't stick? That if you're being directed in a certain way, that you consciously will just not do it?
That's why they use programming to create an alter who will do it. So that you, as Margot, may not consciously want to throw a brick at somebody, but Margot 2 would.
And Margot 1 cannot...
May not ever even know Margot 2 exists. unless you did deprogramming, which we haven't gotten to yet. Now, to continue, and this name you will have heard of, Dr. Wilhelm Reich, in the 1920s to 1956, when he was murdered, in both Europe and the United States, he was the one who learned about orgone energy, which he said was an energy that was in and around the body and in the atmosphere and was constantly available for healing purposes and mind control purposes. Most of Wilhelm Reich's work is not available to the public. Lately, there are books out about him, but they really give a minute amount of information of his actual work. The real bulk of his work is not available to the public and is actually considered to be illegal in the United States. It involves mind control and programming through sexuality and the use of the energies of the sexual part of the body brought up into the mind.
Well, he was portrayed on the surface as someone who was trying to find ways to work out neuroses and all that stuff. His research, was he really more interested in the mind control, or was that stuff just used when people discovered what he found out?
He personally, my belief, he personally was using it for trying to benefit people. Now, his work was then used by the government when he came here during the war against people. And ultimately, he wound up in a federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania, where he mysteriously died.
So he was not part of part of the Illuminati's.
He was under their control and jurisdiction. However, here's the situation: when you're a scientist and you come across something really spectacular, and you're excited about it, and yet the government in which you operate wants it for their own purposes, what choice do you have? You can either not do your work at all or do it for them. Bless you.
Thank you.
It's a choice somebody has to make. Either they stop their life's work because it's being used for something they don't want, or they do their work and come what may with it. That's the choice he made. However, he apparently overstepped the boundary and he was put away and eliminated. And all of his work was confiscated. Yes.
I heard he wasn't totally forthcoming in all of his work, and that's part of the reason why.
Well, he wasn't forthcoming because he knew what it was being used for. So there was some semblance of character there. But, if you read about his personal life and his family life, you can see that he had difficulties and maybe wasn't the nicest person to be around. But that's, again, personal matter. He's not here to defend himself. But here's the most important name that you should remember. Dr. Ewan Cameron in Canada. 1940s, 1950s. His work became the basis for monarch programming. He was from Scotland and moved to Canada and operated in Quebec and Ontario and worked in mental facilities where he would perform intensive electroshock therapy on patients. He would also keep them in deprivation, induce sleep, induce waking periods, create very unpleasant circumstances in order to entrain the mind into being something else. Literally, to break or fragment a person's personality. His work successful with patients in Canada, was then brought to the United States. Hence, we got Candy Jones. And from her, many, many thousands subsequently. There may be some monarch people in this very room. Most likely there are. He was known for his brutality with his patients. And during around, just before this actually occurred, there was a doctor, Albert Hoffman, who worked in Basel, Switzerland. And he worked for Sandow's labs. And he was experimenting with rye fungus and developed what we now know as LSD in 1938. By the way, he went on to form Hoffman-LaRoche Laboratories. But in 1953, the CIA purchased 100 million doses of LSD from Dr. Hoffman in Switzerland. They said for experimental purposes. 100 million doses. And as you may know, in the early 50s, that they purchased this in 1953. And as you may know, subsequently, they performed tests on military personnel, CIA personnel, and the general public without their permission, or without the participants really knowing what was being given to them. One very famous case in New York in the 1950s was the CIA agent who jumped to his death from the hotel window. You remember that story? Only recently did his family sue the government and actually received a settlement. His children and grandchildren received a settlement. And they had his body exhumed. And they actually found that he was dead before his body left the window of that hotel. His skull was fractured in a way incompatible with a fall from the building. So he was murdered and thrown to make it look like a suicide, and even on suicide note.
Were those doses used for the 60s and the,
I'm about to get to that. But you should also know in the 1950s and 60s, as close by as Pennsylvania and New York City, the government sprayed bacteria and viruses and narcotics in the atmosphere to see how it would travel. Those of you who've ever gone along the Pennsylvania Turnpike know those tunnels that go through the mountain. There's, I think, 5 of them that go through the... Well, in the 1950s, during 1955, during Thanksgiving week, the government sprayed influenza strain that they created in those tunnels as the holiday travelers passed through with their vehicles to see how it would spread and who would get sick. They also paid the city of Winnipeg, in Manitoba, Canada, several $1 million to dump from airplanes virus and bacteria over the city to see if it would infect any of the population. And the mayor of Winnipeg agreed to that. They also sprayed nuclear or radioactive material in the subway systems of New York in 1950s and 60s to see what would happen. They never told anybody they did this, and only recently have they revealed even a small part of it. Only recently have they revealed that in the Navy in the 1960s, they purposely gave injections of illness to sailors to see what would happen, and people died. Yes.
What is it with the West Nile disease? What kind of sickness do they spray there? The West Nile disease.
Ah, yeah, yes.
What they spray, this is not
It has nothing to do with West Nile
I know,
illness.
what kind of sickness is that they spray there?
This has to do with what we call a microplasma. It's not a bacteria, it's not a virus. It's actually smaller than that and requires special equipment to be seen. It's a third category of infection and disease that only recently has been revealed. In fact, it's the cause physically of fibromyalgia, which up till recently doctors said was a mental illness, which actually all illness is mental illness. But there actually is a microplasma that causes this. So West Nile disease does not exist outside of the Nile Valley. That's why it's called West Nile disease. It doesn't exist in areas that don't have the same climate. You understand?
Yes, but the thing is, 2 years ago, they wrote Italian TV, another newspaper, and they wrote spray, close your windows, blah, blah, blah. Last year, they told you when afterwards when they did it. This year, they just talk, but they don't let you know anymore when they spray. So
This spraying everywhere. This spraying, it just showed up in Ohio. It just showed up in Louisiana. It's constantly moving west, 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 until everything is covered. And the reason is they are creating illnesses to eliminate certain segments of the population. Animal population, by the way. Let me continue. We left off here with the LSD. That's what I'm going to talk about now. Timothy Leary who was at Harvard University and was funded, now watch this, funded by this organization. What is that?
National Institute of Mental Health.
National Institute of Mental Health. Where have you seen that before? Think of a cartoon. It's called The Secrets of NIM. It was a whole series of videos for children not long ago. I believe it was about a mouse or something like this. So this went from a government organization to a child's movie. Now, NIM, or National Institute of Mental Health, became the funding source for MK Ultra. And that was back in the 1960s. And Timothy Leary worked for the Illuminati and used guinea pigs for LSD so that it could be distributed to the general population through the youth culture. Such people as Allen Ginsberg, Miles Davis, John Lennon, Jim Morrison, and Aldous Huxley, and many of the gurus and mystics that you had seen in the 1960s were all part of this experimentation.
Part of it in what way?
They were
experimenting on? Or
with
they
LSD, both. Both. The government put doses of this in the water supply, in the subway system, sprayed it in the air, etc., etc. And you noticed in the 1960s in the major cities of the United States, crime went up significantly. And people basically went berserk. And what also happened in the 1960s in conjunction with this, the creation of the New Age in 1965. New Age information that I've been telling you ad nauseum about for years.
I once heard that it was attributed, the New Age was attributed to Blavatsky. No, I see his face. Oh, and it's Kissinger.
But
That he was the one that headed that all up. Is there a truth to that, or that's just one?
he was part of the group in Majestic 12 actually, that was part of the creation of the New Age in order to skewer the belief system of the general population.
Well, Ramdas, his partner, went in that direction. Richard Alter, named Ramdas.
Yes, yes, yes.
Spiritual.
Right, right. All those people had changed their name to something that they were not. Absolutely.
So were they being used by the Illuminati, or that Timothy really knew he was an agent?
Yes,
Did
he
Ramdas
did.
say, oh, he was an agent,
He knew willingly and went along with
both
it.
Richard Albert and
Yes,
Timothy.
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's when they started setting up mind control centers, especially in the western United States, that were used as meccas for young people and New Agers to come and get all that wonderful energy that was coming from them. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. They also experimented with opium and heroin that they got from Southeast Asia. And you know that this is when the president's father, in the 1950s, was the chairman of Zapata Oil. And he was the first one to build oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico that were then used to transport the narcotics from Central and South America into the United States. First via the port of New Orleans and Houston and Florida, etc. And then it fanned out into other areas. They also, in the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia, would transport the narcotics in the coffins of the dead soldiers that were being sent home from Vietnam. And it's well known that when their bodies would arrive in Honolulu or San Francisco on their way to their home, that the coffins were opened, and the bodies opened, and in the cavities of the bodies were the pouches of the narcotics that were extracted from them. This is a known fact. This is your government.
It's known as the white train.
So you've known about it. Yes, the white train. Now, who was in the process then at that point of manipulating and creating new and better drugs to be used by the population as a form of control? This was done in Fort Detrick, Maryland. Interesting that the abbreviation for Maryland is MD, don't you think? And they created mind-altering drugs and technology that they shared with the NSA that was in Fort Meade, Maryland. And this then, especially in the late 60s and early 70s, was sent to such places that you now know of as Area 51 and Montauk, and the mind control centers in the west of Santa Fe, Yelm, Washington, Mount Shasta, and yes, Sedona. Interesting that a mecca of the New Age would be in Sedona. What does Sedona mean in Spanish? Any of you who speak Spanish? Who knows what sed means in Spanish? Thirst. And what is Sedona? Cecilia.
Thirst.
Sorry?
Donate.
We'll put that together.
Give thirst.
To donate what? Thirst for what? They use words as play. Remember, it's layer upon layer upon layer of meaning. false information, disinformation. That's when the word disinformation came into being. It's not in the dictionary either. Remember disinformation? What does disinformation mean?
It's part of the truth.
It's a lie sandwich. There's a truth in the middle, or two lies on the outside, or two truths on the outside and a lie in the middle. But you get hooked on the truth part even though you believe the whole thing, and it's not all completely true. And even again, Santa Fe, what does that mean in Spanish? Holy faith. And what is Santa Fe the center of? Spirituality. A different kind of faith or belief system, which is totally false. I have a lot of clients in Santa Fe who are spending their time trying to get out because they're sorry they went there. And now they can't get out. First of all, it's surrounded by fire. And second of all, they have no more money. They become completely destitute because everything they did is now stopped. So they have no way of getting out, no resources or method of getting out. Same thing is true in Taos, New Mexico. Everyone I know there, desperately seeking to get out. The noise coming from underground is making them insane. That's where the hum is. Only the hum is now extended across the entire northern sector of New Mexico. And by the way, another area that is located, that has detected a hum, is in northern Vermont and northern New Hampshire. Something's going on under the ground there on the border with Quebec. Something very big is happening underneath there. They're digging something. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that recently we had a mine disaster in Pennsylvania, which, by the way, Pennsylvania is just a big disaster in itself. And what is that encouraging? What is that situation? What did that lead up to? What did they decide after that? First of all, that there's something wrong with the maps of the underground. They're not accurate. And they're discouraging people from going underground. Mining. Many miners, almost all of those said they will never go back underground again. What's been happening in China and South Africa recently as well? Mining accidents where they are all dead. Discouraging underground activity.
Stewart?
Yes.
What's going on with all the whales beaching?
I'll get to that at the end. That's not part of this. I have to wait till the end of that. Sorry. Let me give you a list. Okay. Does that mean I have 5 minutes or 10 minutes or what? Say it out loud, please.
Have 15 minutes.
Okay. And then I go to questions. Let me give you a list of projects that have existed in this century, or I should say now last century, that were very influential on what's going on right now. In 1949, there was Project Bluebird. Project Bluebird was about conditioning personnel to prevent extraction of secret information during special interrogation techniques. For example, if you were captured by the enemy and you were tortured, you wouldn't reveal any information. It involved memory enhancement. Many of the victims of Project Bluebird were actually tattooed with a bluebird on their body. The clinics or places that were involved were Mount Sinai Hospital, Boston Psychiatric Hospital, the University of Minnesota, Valley Forge General Hospital, Detroit Psychiatric Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, and the National Institute of Health, also known as NIH. Those were all involved with Project Bluebird. That led into 1951 to Project Artichoke. Now, what do you do with an artichoke? Peel away layer and layer and layer to get to what? The core. The core. This was the incipience of layering and mind control programming, which we'll talk about tomorrow. This used experiments in LSD and also the use of sodium pentothal, and experimented in narco-hypnotic interrogation, which meant they used hypnosis and drugs simultaneously. Narco-hypnotic interrogation. They were interested in medications and the effects of amnesia. They used medications and used the effects of amnesia. And then they used a drug called, I'll write it for you, bulbocapnine. I don't know if any of the nursing people or medical people have heard that before. Bulbocapnine, which was used to create a stupor or catatonia. A person would just be like a robot, looked like they were completely out of it. And that drug was tested on prisoners and students in universities, many of whom wound up in mental institutions because they had brain damage. I will tell you that many of the prisons and psychiatric units of this country and other countries are filled with mind control and programming victims that have gone wrong, that were not successful. This then led into 1962 the creation of MK Ultra, which is actually not one project, but an umbrella project to fund other secret experiments. It was also known as MK Delta. They were the same thing. Only MK Delta was used more on the military than on the general population. They used radiation, electroshock, standard psychology and psychiatry, sociology methods, harassment, paramilitary devices and materials, and over 139 different drugs, a list of which you will receive tomorrow. This then led, which actually was from the 1940s to today, the Monarch program. This was its sex slaves, otherwise known as presidential models. That was a term given to them. They became human tape recorders, spies, couriers, and were also used to download and install programming via sexual activity with both male and female subjects. is in current use. Yes?
They will program to download or to perform
Both. Depends. Each one had different purpose. Some had multiple. Sorry?
You can either input that program to someone or
Retrieve. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Marilyn Monroe was kept as a prisoner. She was not allowed to leave her house. She was not allowed to leave wherever she went on tour. She was a prisoner always, and she always had someone watching her. And she was murdered in her own home because she found out about a lot of secret projects, and she was having an affair with the Kennedys, among other people. And she said she was going to spill it wide open. Her exact term was, I'm going to blow it all open. And she was about to hold a news conference the next day. And an ambulance showed up to her house. This was seen by neighbors. She was taken out, and then several hours later returned, and that's when her housekeeper found her dead in her room, supposedly from an overdose. She did not kill herself. She was murdered. Now, there are other projects, and I can't go into all of them. There's hundreds of them. But these are the names that may come up in your own deprogramming techniques, if I may. Keep that over here. I'm going to put a circle around this one. It's MK Draco, Hatter, Reach, MK Zeno, Dancer, Watchtower, and Green Star. It's part of it. But the reason I circled Green Star was because it is in current operation. Current. It involves staged alien invasion sequence that's in process now.
What about Dr. Delgado, who did the implants and directly came out that this population should be mind controlled because that's the only way to keep.
Well,
Who was he part of this?
he's part of this whole thing.
And
That
he worked in anyone particular?
That would be part of MK Ultra, and depending, it could be Monarch. Actually, one of the, just let me see if I have that here. Actually, that would be Watchtower, the Project Watchtower. That involves monitoring. But what are we seeing today on the news, just about every day, that involves the promotion of chipping or implant? Every day is another girl being raped and murdered and kidnapped, yes. And what did the police chief of LA County say on the news the other day? Well, if we could chip children and they have the technology available, which will be available soon, there'll never be another missing child. That's exactly what they said on television on CNN just 2 days ago. So yes, there's been one after, and this morning on the news, I think it was this morning or maybe yesterday, they asked the federal prosecutor, why are all these kidnappings happening all of a sudden? I don't know. It just happens. Well, isn't it interesting that those two teenage girls that were kidnapped yesterday in California, did you hear about that?
Yes.
And what did they implement for the first time?
Amber.
Project Amber. What's Project Amber?
It's like a big brother system.
What is that you see on the sign that say traffic is congested or accident that exits such and such? Well, Project Amber then flashes up the license plate of a car that's kidnapping people, or description of missing people. So they implemented the first time, and wouldn't you know, a couple of hours later they found them. Just before they think he was just about to kill him and bury him. Well, I guess if they programmed him, they would know what the next thing was going to be. Just like the Mexican man in California, who supposedly kidnapped and murdered that little girl while the grandmother was watching her. Never did that before. They felt he did before, but he was not convicted. And the little girl Van Dam, also in California, who was supposedly murdered by her neighbor, who was out with her mother that night. So what's up with all that stuff? Well, we'll get to that tomorrow. That's not an accident. Does it ever cross your mind lately that everything is happening in groups? That little girls are being kidnapped one after the other all of a sudden? And then something's being implemented right after? Or that CEOs and corporations are suddenly producing false information and immediately there's a commission and a federal agency about it. Immediately. Well, if you ever had a problem for the government and asked them to look into something, your great-grandchildren may not get an answer. But all of a sudden, they do things like that. Does anyone think about why all of a sudden there's like 15 events, all the same, happening in the same week? And all of a sudden there's a solution imposed. You have to think about that. That's the 2001 to 2003 activation that's occurring. Implementation of programs and control of the population. Create the situation, provide the solution you want to impose, but make it so that the population says, yes, we want that solution. The stocks go down. Everyone's losing money. Then they put the agency in and it starts to go better. Now everybody's happy. Yes, now everything's under control. All those bad CEOs will go to jail and pay for it. Meanwhile, while that's happening, they're bombing Iraq and you don't know about it. Troops are being massed in Jordan and Kuwait by England and the United States in preparation for an invasion, and you don't know about it. But instead they have congressional hearings on, should we bomb Iraq? Should we not bomb Iraq? What should we do?
A friend of mine was talking to a guy, a consultant to the government, and he's saying, one of the things he was saying is that bringing out of mothball all the battleships, and no one knows that this is going on.
They will destroy or invade Iraq and then tell you about it. And then the stock market will go down for good.
When do you think they're going to do that?
It's happening now.
Yeah.
They just bombed Iraq Sunday, they bombed it Tuesday, and for all I know they did it again today. Already there are troops. King Abdullah of Jordan is on his way here, or maybe he's here already. But there are thousands and thousands of troops in his country on the border with Iraq. Already in process. While the Congress is talking about and debating, and while this one's doing that, while that one's and you're diverted with this child kidnapped and that thing happening, all diversions, while they're doing something else. Did you know, I put it on my website, and I'll see who reads my website. This past week of the blue orb that was flying over Washington, D.C., and F-16s were scrambled, and then it shot off into space.
Yeah.
That was on the news. Why would that be on the news? When things like that are on the news before, they laugh at them. Now they scrambled F-16s. Why? Project Green Star. In process. Staged alien invasion. An asteroid's going to come to hit the Earth in 2019. And then they said, no, it's not going to hit the Earth in 2019. Then they tell you about an asteroid that passed the Earth within minuscule distance. That we didn't know was coming. Oh, but you can know something's coming in 2019, but you didn't know that was coming. And there's more that I need to finish with you tomorrow. But that's a foundation Tomorrow we're going to discuss intricate details of how it's done and what you can do about it. And so at this point, I'll open up to any questions you have about what we've discussed tonight. No questions.
Yeah,
We're all under mind control.
This Marilyn Monroe situation, Kathy O'Brien had mentioned in her book, Transformation of America, that she was the first presidential model. But she doesn't, her background didn't quite fit with them programming her that way. So I don't quite see how that fit in, because they take certain types of people. Was her background so fragmented that they
Yes.
were able to do that to her?
Who did they use in the beginning especially? They used women who had a certain appearance and who had very unhappy home lives or backgrounds. Now, Marilyn Monroe came from a terrible family situation when she was young. And she really already had a fractured mind pattern or problems within her emotional construct that made her very easily programmable. Sorry? Yes, her mother died in a mental institution, and she came from poverty, from nothingness, and that's what they like. Because part of the monarch programming input is, you are nothing. You are nothing except what we give you. Loyalty to the program, loyalty to the programmers. And tomorrow, we will learn the difference between a programmer, a handler, and a controller. They're three different things. And I'm going to show you the diagram of that. And there's going to be some handouts tomorrow. And you're going to see the difference, or the characteristic or correlation between so-called UFO abduction scenarios or symptoms and ritual abuse or satanic ceremony. How they correlate. That's what you're going to see tomorrow.
You said that in Iraq, bombings going on, and when the stock market will fall after
When
they
that-
announce it?
Yes.
And
Because it will be fear in the public. Need to protect your investments. What will happen with Iraq? Because it won't just be Iraq. It will also be Iran. Iran will help try to defend Iraq.
That's going to happen. I mean,
It's not happening now.
I mean, the big wall.
Yes.
You had mentioned next June would be the total financial collapse.
Sorry?
You had mentioned next June would be the total
That's when
financial
the
collapse
new...
of the world.
The collapse will occur before, but that's when the new financial system will be installed.
Is this thing like, I've been looking at what was going to trigger the destruction of the dome of the rock, which you say is part of their agenda, and that still is as far as
Oh
you know?
yes, has to be.
Is that somehow that by attacking Iraq, they'll have him launch missiles on Israel, and in retribution to that, that's how they'll have the excuse
Yes,
to
one
bomb
of,
the
one of
dome
those
of Iraq?
one of those missiles will accidentally strike the dome.
Also, one of his own missiles or our missiles?
Well, whose?
I don't think it'll be Iraq.
What missile shot down that Russian plane flying over the Ukraine a few months ago? What's up with the Ukraine anyway? Why is everything crashing there? We just had a disaster at the air show. A few months ago they shot down a commercial airliner over the Black Sea. What's up with Ukraine? Did you see the film of that fighter jet, an Su-27 crashing into the crowd? Did you see the film of it?
I think it was a particle beam.
No, it was directly targeted and let go. The pilots ejected, they're safe. They aimed it and jumped. Yes. Yes.
So why is it back in Ukraine?
That's what we're going to find out. At the same time, there were mining disasters in Ukraine that week. Someone doesn't like Ukraine.
It's the Ukraine where Chernobyl was.
Where Chernobyl was, and also the Filatov Institute, which was their version of the Montauk Project in Odessa, Ukraine. We'll talk about that tomorrow.
Stock market collapse, when that occurs, that's everything. That's retirement plans, that's
Mhm.
bank accounts.
Yes, right.
Everything that,
Mhm.
any money you have anywhere is invested in
That's
stock.
right. Yes.
So when it collapses, there's no way to put your money.
Correct.
Okay.
Buildings are buildings.
Just think there might be something I should be doing.
And machinery is machinery, and property is property. That still holds certain value.
That's why I say to invest in tangible items, real estate, gold bullion, which now you can't get anymore, things that you can hold in your hand. Because even though it may go down in value, it still will be there. So that's what I have been telling people. Now I know people who've lost millions and millions of dollars recently. No, they'll never get it back. Never. This little uprise again, that's to tease the remainder into investing again, so that's total collapse after that.
So selling your stock is going to help you because wherever you put the money is.
Oh, 1,000 times nothing is still nothing. What? Where did you see this happening before? Where is it happening right now? Argentina. Remember I told you to watch Argentina? No more news from Argentina.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Nothing. Why? Because then you'll know what the story's going to be. Total economic collapse. You cannot remove more than $150 a week from your bank account, no matter what you have in there. And you can only spend it in certain places, and you cannot go anywhere until they revamp the entire financial system. That's in Argentina. Where did you see this happen in history before, where wheelbarrows worth of money could only buy you a light loaf of bread? Germany. And what happened shortly thereafter? Well, who took over in Germany right after that? Hitler. Is it the same people who are doing this system? Yes. Same people. They learned much from those other events, and so now they're continuing with the knowledge that they can succeed. What's happening in the European Union? What were they so proud to announce just a few days ago about the finances or the money?
The euro passed the dollar in value.
Well, actually, it exactly equals it. What was the last currency to exactly equal the dollar? 1 for 1? The Argentinian peso, which is now gone. You see a trend here.
So wherever you see matches the dollar,
That's what they're doing. Equalize the currency so that it can be one global currency. Once there's one global currency, you can eliminate it and replace it with something else all at once. Credit system.
When I was over there and I put $100 there, you got $200, 105 euro. Now in Germany they used to call this 1 cent a penny. Now they call it a cent. It says what, 1 cent, 2 cents. They don't even use the German word anymore, they call it cents. So I assume that America sooner or later also uses the euro for whatever they want to call it.
Actually, you can go anywhere now with an American dollar and use it anywhere. Doesn't even matter. They will accept it everywhere. It's become global currency. So that's what's in preparation financially. But how do you get people to accept all of this? This is through programming and mind control. How do you get them mind controlled? Fear. How did they last install fear? September 11th. Made everybody afraid to do anything. Any solution. Because of September 11th, you now have a Gestapo agency in the government called Homeland Security.
on your website, somebody wrote in saying they saw an announcement called the Home Planet.
Yes, as a result of the blue orb over Washington.
Is that true?
I don't know
You
yet.
know, have you seen anything on
Makes
that?
sense, though.
I haven't heard any other
No,
announcements about
that
it.
makes sense. Makes sense. That's the next step, isn't it?
That would be the next one.
Again, what's going on with the whales?
Ah,
Stuff.
yeah.
That's a nice
I read it on your website.
That was at Cape Cod, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That area. In fact, I did write about it, didn't I?
Two separate incidents.
Yeah. What are whales? What frequency are they close to?
Dolphins.
Dolphin frequency. And what are dolphins?
Very
higher intelligence that are able to communicate information. So if you destroy the frequency or destroy those entities, you no longer can have danger communication between whale and dolphin and human frequencies. This is happening all over the United States. Remember a year or two ago in Florida, all the dolphins washed up with cracked skulls from sonic experimentation that they said was an accident. What else has happened? What happened 2 days ago in Arizona? A lot of animal anomalies. What's happening? What happened in Arizona? A woman was stung by hundreds of killer bees and died. Same killer bees that are migrating north and east. They're already in Texas and Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada. All of the warm, hot places, even Florida, there's indications they exist. And there's also indication to suggest that they have now adapted to cold weather, which means they can exist here. See? Yeah.
Who fears the communication between the whales and
The Illuminati. No, with humans. With humans.
Might want to mention the deer and the elk killings out west.
I do have to speak up.
Might want to mention the deer and the elk killings out west from the disease that's related to the...
Oh, yeah. They're also finding that deer and elk are, well, they're not finding, they're claiming that these species may have a form of mad cow disease. And so wherever they are found, they're suggesting their elimination, even if they're healthy. Why? And a guy was on the news last night saying, why would the government, this man said, why would the government of the United States kill innocent, healthy animals? He said right on the news. Why do you think?
So we can't kill them anymore.
Yes. Why would that be a major importance to the Illuminati?
Because if you control all of the food, then
Yeah.
you control it.
If you eliminate wild source of food, then you control the intake of all people. So if you eliminate any possibility of hunting or going after wild game because it's poisoned or you've killed them all, then you completely control the food chain. Everything that you put in your mouth is controlled. No possibility of you going outside the system. Yes, makes sense. Brilliant. If you tell women, that was on the news, don't eat tuna anymore, especially if you're pregnant because it has so much mercury now, so that's going to make people not want wild or go fishing or have wild fish from the sea. They will have to only have from government farms or what's grown independently and packaged.
Is that false?
Who's speaking?
Is that false information? There was no, that there was no mercury?
It's insignificant. And the deer that they tested out of thousands and thousands, supposedly 4 had evidence of the disease. There was a man, I forgot what state it was in, I think Colorado, who grows elk for food, and the government ordered him to kill his entire flock, even though there's nothing wrong with them.
Well, I heard that the state of Florida was going around just cutting down fruit trees because there was some disease that might spread from people's fruit trees in their backyard.
Right. Yes. Yes. So anything natural, anything that would give you the opportunity to go outside of the system is being taken away from you.
Is that also some sort of a weird fish, piranha-like
Oh,
fish
that was in Maryland.
Yeah.
It was the Chinese snakehead fish.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And it's a meat eater.
So it'll keep you out of the water and fishing. And
Yeah. I wonder how it got there. And then also mysteriously in Iowa, the lakes are filled with piranha. In Iowa.
Oh my God.
No one knows how that happened. So what is this all designed to do? Stay away from... Oh, and then a little boy that died swimming in a lake in Florida from some strange amoeba-like creature that was in there. That, yeah, 2. Well, I don't know if the other one died. He got sick.
Oh, right.
Maybe he did. I don't know. But encouraging you to not do natural things. Don't go in the lake. Go in a swimming pool that has chemicals in it, no piranha in it, no amoeba. See? All this kind of thing.
I also wanted to bring up, I think a week ago, there was an article about bug bots.
Oh yes,
Those tiny
bug
bugs.
bots. I was just telling somebody about that.
Yeah.
They're actually, now I always make jokes about this. Remember every time I'd come here in the summer and a bug would fly in the room, I'd say it's a government bug? Well, they recently revealed a contraption, a robotic bug-like creation that was used, they're going to use to spy on, they said, military. And they're going to shrink it down to the size of a flea, eventually, supposedly. That means they've already done it. So I wasn't kidding when I told you it could be a government bug.
Now, on the,
Yes?
the soldiers got that with 5 holes living lives.
Oh, yes, I wrote about that. And now a wife killed her husband. Did you hear that one? Fort Bragg as well. That's the 5th murder in the same place. What happened there several years ago, 20 years ago, maybe more now, 30 years ago? Who remembers?
Where?
In Fort Bragg, North Carolina. What happened, the very famous case? Who remembers? A doctor claimed that a satanic cult came into his house in the middle of the night and murdered his wife and children and tied him up. Remember that?
He's from Long Beach, California.
His wife, his family was from Long Island. Do you remember that case? It was in the 70s, wasn't it?
He's still in jail.
He's still in jail. He claims he didn't do it. But here we are, 30 years later, and these murders are taking place again. Fort Bragg is known for its mind control programming of soldiers. He was a case of mind control gone bad. McDonald, that was the name. Dr. McDonald, that's correct. Very good memory. Yes?
During when the young ladies were being kidnapped,
Say that loud, please.
when the little girls were being kidnapped, there was one girl that broke free.
Oh, she chewed her way out of the... Yeah. That was in Philadelphia. And your question about her?
Why was she allowed to go with their purpose?
That had nothing to do with the program. See? Quite honestly, if it involves a minority child, not to do with the program. Quite honestly. Yeah, it helped them. That was a real one.
The girls in California were minorities. The ones who escaped.
They were still white. They were Caucasian, even though they had Hispanic names. Because they interviewed the girls and they looked... They looked very white to me on the news. What's that?
I think one was white, one was black.
I can't hear you. They interviewed her friends, and the place where they went up, supposedly in that hill, there was some kind of but there was some kind of station there, or base, or telephone. There was some kind of tower there, and they said the news said it was a lover's lane, that kind of thing. No one knew it existed. On the news yesterday, these children who were in the area, these other teenagers, that they never knew it existed. Nobody they know ever goes there. They never heard of it before.
They said it was a pop.
Yes, I know, but these girls on television said they never knew it existed. No one ever knew about it. And that those girls would never go to such a place. And so, you have to look at that too. That was to instigate that amber system in California. And what else are they trying to do with the postal workers and delivery men and to spy on people's homes that they go to if something looks suspicious to report on them. So that's also a form of programming in mind control.
They're still trying to legalize mind control torture to get information from the young people.
Yes,
That's
but Yeah, yeah. But they said that if it's under military or enemy conditions, it's acceptable.
Yeah. But there was some thrust to do it also under other circumstances because of the terrorism.
Yeah. Because of this terrorism thing, they will install everything. The fear involved with it will allow them to put everything in position. And they have.
Do you think that before they go all out with bombing Iraq, there'll be more terrorism? Because people are
Yeah, they will
opposed to that.
be. Yeah, probably as you get closer to September 11th or on that day, something will happen. They seem to be concentrating more now in the Middle East, in Jerusalem and that area. And I really feel that done with Iraq's going imminently. And I've been saying that for a while, but it's getting very close.
Is that what's coming in the Middle East? Is that the focal point that they're done with Iraq? I mean, it's so bad now there. What's the end product of that?
That has to do with what we call end-time programming, which we'll talk about tomorrow. And many of the people being activated now have end-time programming in their mind pattern. That's what we'll be discussing tomorrow.
What does that mean?
That's what we'll be discussing tomorrow. It's a very long and complicated subject.
What a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Could that be positive and negative? Or just
I
negative?
guess it's a matter of perspective, isn't it? Yes.
I was just thinking about back in the 60s with when we were doing stuff and everything back there, and TN came around then. Is that a form? Is that
Well, I mean, transcendental meditation's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Now, how they used it and how they taught it, that was part of mind control programming.
The Beatles popularized it.
Yes. Well, John Lennon was part of that Timothy Leary. Right, right. Most of those Maharishis and yogis, and especially the ones that came to this country, were all under control, all under mind control and programming.
because they give you that mantra, and of course you don't know what it means.
Yes, yes. No different than telling people there are chakras over their head or under their feet, which doesn't exist. But if you focus on something, and you put energy there, you create something that can be tapped into. You create an antenna that can be tapped into. And if they have everybody doing the same thing, it's easy. We'll talk about that tomorrow when we get into technology. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the use of various forms of programming, technology, abuse or sexuality, sound waves, all kinds of things like that is what we talk about tomorrow.
Would you say that the Grateful Dead was some form of mind control?
All of those heavy rock stars, especially from the 60s and 70s, were, if they were famous, under programming. And that I will discuss when we talk about the music industry tomorrow. Particularly, believe it or not, country and western, which is a big form, and still is, of mind control. And there are triggers in many of the words in the songs in country and western. Whereas in rock, it's in the frequency and in the cadence of the beat that the programming is subliminally installed.
The members of the band KISS admitted that the letters stand for Kids in Service to Satan.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Yes. Ozzy Osbourne. Look at him. Okay. Totally blitzed out. I don't think he can tie his own shoes anymore. Yet he's very popular now with that show. Of course, his wife is dying. She's dying.
I don't know where I read this, that B flat, the tone of B flat is good for interrupting programming frequency. Have you ever heard that?
Not exactly correct. No, not correct. Not correct. My time up? My time is up. But don't fear, I'll be back tomorrow at 9.
And on a happy note.
And a what?
And on a happy note.
And on a happy note, I would ask you also to please be on time tomorrow. We have a lot of things to talk about. This seminar is very different than what you've been used to before. We don't do visualizations and exercises, obviously, but there's a lot of information that we need to know that you can apply hopefully on your own. So please be prompt tomorrow.